Well, welcome back to the Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics and the state legislature. I'm your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover, and very excited to be joined by a first-time guest, Ali Macedo from Assembly District 33, including Fresno, Kings, Tulare counties. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Josh. It's good to be here today.
It's great having you. And I know everyone's excited. We kind of promoted, that you were coming on last episode, and everyone's been kind of listening and excited to get to know all the new people. So tell us a little bit about your background and what made you run for state office.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how I ended up in Sacramento. I'm from Tulare. It's a small farming town in the Central Valley, and my family's been in agriculture for generations. We own the oldest livestock market in the state of California.
Nice. We
sell dairy and beef cattle. I'm the fourth generation there. And then my mom is also a farmer. So we farm almonds and just got into citrus. And
Very cool.
We have been in that industry for a long time. She was a civil engineer. She still is. And so I actually got my start in the engineering world.
Okay.
And did a lot of project design, permitting, and compliance, and things were just getting out of control. As we know, this year we're going into a lot of CEQA reform, hopefully. But
I hope so.
Yeah. So that's where, I left kind of that engineering world and went to law school, but I stayed in the engineering world while I was going to law school, and it was brutal. I would commute an hour to go to law school at night.
That's
stayed
crazy.
working full time, but debt free.
Hey, that's huge.
It
all
is.
right, for especially for younger people, that's huge.
It was really tough, but it is possible.
It is possible, yeah.
But to make it even more interesting, I graduated in the middle of COVID.
Wow.
What a great time to graduate law school on Zoom. So after that, though, I had a great opportunity of starting my own business, which was Macedo Environmental Consulting. I still own that and operate that, and we do all of the environmental compliance work with the Air Board, Water Board, Resource Management, OSHA. I mean, you name the acronym, I've probably worked with them. And the bureaucracy space is just insane. And that's why I saw there was plenty of people in courtrooms defending agriculture, but the growing space was actually the regulatory space. And when we talk about ag law, that's a big part of it is in the regulatory space. So I saw a need for reform in those areas because it was growing so rapidly that so many people just were saying, I'm not going to do it anymore. And that's where now I'm up here in Sacramento.
That's amazing, and I think I'm really glad you're obviously doing all that compliance work and helping, agriculture with that. But it really underlines how big a hard it is to do business in California, right? I mean, the fact that you literally have jobs out there where you just have to be in compliance with everything because it is so hard. And I've toured some of these dairies and local ag, folks more in my area up here. And this is what they talk about all the time. I mean, they're seeing a lot of folks obviously leave the state or sell their land or whatever it is. And it's really tough to hang in there. So,
well, if you ever want to see a real dairy, you can come down to my neck of the woods and I'll teach you a thing
or
two.
All right, yeah. No, count me in. Hey, look, I'm from Fresno, so I love the Central Valley. Much love. My dad was a Fresno State Bulldog. I grew up going to the games, right? Exactly. So
I didn't go to Fresno State.
Hey, but you can't. If you're in the Valley, you kind of have to root for the Bulldogs.
Right? I went to law school in Clovis, so I mean
hey,
it's kind of like Fresno adjacent.
Fresno adjacent, absolutely.
We got to support our CSUs.
I played Little League in Clovis, so yeah, for
there
sure.
You go.
So tell us a little bit about. I mean, and I'll ask you about, I guess, your journey to this seat too. But tell us about your district. What. I know we kind of talked about it a little bit, but you've got Hanford and Tulare, and tell us a little bit about that.
So the main cities in my district are Tulare, Hanford, Porterville, Kingsburg, Reedley. I have a large number of unincorporated areas, Corcoran, Avenal, but pretty much the entirety of my district is based in agriculture. 4 out of every 5 jobs in my district are directly or indirectly related to agriculture. It's very rural. It's very poor. The average income in my district is $29,000 a year. Yeah. So when we were talking about affordability up here, although I'm sure people in big cities are feeling it, we're really feeling it in the Central Valley. And because of that, we're also seeing a reduction in resources in the Central Valley, not just in agriculture, but in general in education and in healthcare and public safety. But if we don't get water, which is a very fundamental thing that we need to grow our crops and raise animals, then people are going to leave the Central Valley, but we're not like other industries that can just pick up and move.
Right.
We are very rooted and very established, so it is terrifying of what the next 10 years of the Central Valley is going to look like. You're from Fresno. The Fresno that I grew up in, the Tulare I grew up in, they're just very different now. And if we lose that superpower of growing our own food, that's terrifying to me. It is the most temperate climate, the most bountiful soil. We have the most incredible technology. We have a truly incredible workforce, and every reason why we should be successful. It's unfortunate that I think bureaucracy has gotten in the way of that. And there's so many factors outside of our control in agriculture. Actually, nearly all of them are outside of our control. Yeah. But when we have people up here in Sacramento that don't understand what it is that we actually do, why we do it, the science of it, it's really frustrating. That's really the whole meaning of me coming up here, is not just providing legislators with pro-ag talking points, actually educating them on what it is we do.
That's awesome. And like, I don't know, it's so frustrating to me because I do think so much of our state is represented, let's be honest, by people in Los Angeles County and the Bay Area that really don't, like they go to the grocery store and they buy their food or their Trader Joe's or the whatever, Whole Foods or wherever you go.
Whole paycheck, yeah,
Whole paycheck, exactly, if you can afford it. And they just don't understand these issues, right? And it's so frustrating because like California has been blessed with this amazing, asset of our climate and our soil, and everything combined is just the perfect place to do this. Right. And yet we're taking it for granted, right? And we're in a lot of ways making it impossible to do. So really, really frustrating. But so I have to ask you, like, why'd you run for the assembly? Like, what kind of prompted you to do that? And had you been in government before or anything like that?
So my exposure to government started back all the way in 1998. I was 4 years old. My dad was running for city council in the city of Tulare, and I was walking precincts with a shirt that said "Vote for my daddy," nice. With his picture on it. He was dressed as Paul Revere. It was great.
That's awesome.
And my dad was on council and mayor of Tulare for about 20 years.
Wow, okay.
So growing up, I just loved going to events with him, and most of the time, because he was an elected official, I would sit at tables with other elected officials, and I would hear the things that they were talking about and be just so fascinated and participate. And, along the way, people like Devin Nunes and Connie Conway and our sheriffs and our DAs and our supervisors, I would just always tell them, someday I want to get involved and I just want to fight for this place and make it better. And they said, well, keep getting educated, keep working hard, and your time will come. And it just felt like kind of a perfect moment.
That's great.
Devin Mathis announced rather late.
Yeah, I remember. He was my seatmate, so yes. I remember that.
It was a little shocking right at Thanksgiving in 2023 to realize my entire life was about to change. And I didn't really know where my start in politics was going to be, but I am a person of faith, and I just prayed that God was going to put me on the right path in life. And I didn't know if necessarily I was going to win, but I felt like this opportunity was presented to me for a reason. And it was a very long year of campaigning. The early primary is awful. And announcing so late with the holidays was tough. Yeah. But I mean, it was an incredible experience, like I said. And the entire time, I just realized I'm going up there because we have to fight for the valley.
Yeah, it's a gift and a curse to go late because, like, on the one hand, you're like, I'm so behind, but on the other hand, you have less time, so you're not going to be doing it as long.
You also just don't have time to realize the misery. It's
exactly.
Great.
Yeah, I had a very similar situation. So yeah, it was. There's pros and cons, but I hear you for sure.
Yeah,
so that's
absolutely.
Awesome. Well, obviously glad to have you up here, and I have to ask how your time is going, but obviously to set the stage a little bit for this, you've had a wild few weeks. Like, you've only been in office for a couple months, and it's been wild. So tell us a little bit about, some of the fun stuff you've been dealing with.
Okay, well, let's see. Within the first week of me being up in session, California caught on fire. We had a shift in federal administration that sent a lot of people up here kind of spiraling.
Right.
I had a tomato thrown at me by a protester and was alerted via email at closing on a Friday that I was being removed from some of my committees, two of which I was the vice chair.
And that was last week, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was last week, yeah.
So don't worry,
not
we're creating
connected
bingo
to the tomato.
cards. No connection to the tomato. But each day is a different adventure up here, and you kind of just have to roll with it and laugh. But a lot of people, are you upset? Are you angry?
Yeah.
No, that's what I signed up for, right? Like, we don't come up here for the easy life.
You have to be resilient, right?
Nothing's personal. It's political. Yeah. Like, the ego part of this is something that has been interesting for me. I didn't come up here to put my name in the history books. I came up here because I love the Central Valley and I want to fix it.
Yeah.
And the amount of pushback that you receive when I believe I'm trying to do the right thing, and I try to be nonpartisan. on things like water. You know, water doesn't discriminate. I represent Democrats and Republicans alike. Everybody's got to eat. So agriculture is pretty non-controversial, at least you would think. So it is shocking to me, but it's not surprising that, you know, there's going to be pushback. And this is a lot of it people learning who I am as a legislator up here and, you know, what does the potential of my political career look like? And I think that's still to be seen.
For sure. So on the tomato thing, all right, so you got a tomato, but you guys were doing a press conference on high-speed rail, right?
Right.
Tell us a little bit about, because I know this has been a focus of yours, but what were you trying to accomplish, and why were these people so angry?
I don't even know if they know why they were angry, but I'll set the scene for you. So I have a bill, AB 267, and it is asking to divert the money that cap and trade gives every year over the next 2 years. So it'd be $2 billion total from high-speed rail to water infrastructure that we have neglected for decades. I thought it was a great bill because I'm still keeping ag jobs, but I'm also creating jobs for these projects.
100%.
I'm making sure that we're helping urban and rural alike. I'm north-south. Thought, like, this is going to be great, right? So apparently that wasn't necessarily how a lot of people, or not a lot of people, some people felt about it. And I started looking into the finances of this project, and it just terrified me. The amount of money that had been spent, and I just didn't feel like we had a lot to show for it. And so I actually wrote a letter to President Trump saying that I thought it would be a good idea to look at this project more closely, and if we're going to spend the money on it, how can we, you know, make sure we're getting where we need to go? So Secretary Duffy's office reached out to my office and said, you know, keep this kind of quiet, but we're going to have a press conference down in Southern California. We'd like you to be there. Apparently it wasn't really kept very quiet because there was a media invite. So yeah, I left Sacramento at 2 o'clock in the morning and drove down to Los Angeles, and we were at the train station.
You drove down.
I drove down there.
That's commitment.
Well, I drove down there because the flight schedule was going to be really interesting navigating down in Southern California. But so I get down there, Secretary Duffy just purely announced that they were going to launch a 10-week investigation into the federal money that had been spent on the project. That was it.
Which, I mean, I think if you pulled that, even putting your thoughts on high-speed rail aside, if you support high-speed rail, you should want to know where that money went.
Precisely.
If you oppose high-speed rail, obviously you want to know where that money went. But I mean, where's the controversy? It's crazy.
That's what was so funny to me. I'm like, you're angry about knowing where your money is going? But it was the middle of the day on a Thursday that these protesters were outside. So something tells me they weren't super concerned with their tax dollars. But they had signs that were misleading. They were chanting things that didn't even make sense. And so after the press conference, I decided that I would take it upon myself to go out to talk with them, right? Because I'm one of those people that I truly want to know what the opposition thinks and believes, because I'll take that into account. And somebody started talking about Fresno, and I said, well, do you live there? Because I actually live in the Central Valley, and started talking about, you know, people might not use a high-speed rail to get to work when we have farm workers that are driving on roads that are potholes are the size of their car, right? And then they can't afford to fix their car, whatever it is. And no sooner that I finally thought I was getting through to a single protester, the first tomato was thrown and was so poorly aimed, I just ignored it. But then the second one actually came towards my face, and I pulled a matrix move and
it was impressive. And I don't have the clip lined up today, but you can go to Allie's X account and check it out. But I mean, seriously, it was impressive. And I heard one of them was dressed like a clown. Like
people were dressed like clowns and dinosaurs. I think the highlight of the tomato situation, though, was now on national news networks. They have slowed it down and put a spotlight on the tomato, so you can see the tomato coming at me. And it was. Everybody, how did you react? I turned around and laughed. Like, there's no way this is real. Clowns and dinosaurs are throwing tomatoes at me when I'm trying to tell them I want to know where your hard-earned money is going. You just can't make this kind of things up.
That's just amazing. Yeah, it's so then last week the new update, and we will touch on this briefly. The speaker sent out a letter, and I'm trying to pull it up here. Let's see here on the committee changes. So, you know, in California, obviously, or in the California Legislature, in the state assembly, the speaker really does have all the power, right? When it comes to our Republican leader can recommend people for committees and say, this is who I want on all these committees. But at the end of the day, it is the speaker alone that gives you your committees and takes your committees away. And so, you know, it appeared to be a pretty retaliatory move. Although I'm kind of confused about what was being retaliated for. But
same.
But yeah, we got this letter, and you were removed from, what was it like?
I was vice chair of natural resources,
vice
chair of GO. And I was on the budget committee and on budget sub 4.
Got it.
So
okay.
Of the people that had removal, I probably got it the worst.
I mean, had they even had any committee hearings yet? I didn't
even have a chance to be a bad vice chair.
No, yeah. So it was a rough start, and I think in a lot of ways, this was a reaction to something. I don't really know exactly what. I think 5 of our colleagues that's about a quarter of our caucus got kicked off of committees, right? So, including, people that obviously you're new here, but including members like, Joe Patterson, who's been on this podcast, who has a very great reputation in this building.
And loves the gym, apparently.
Loves the gym, works across the aisle. So definitely something that hopefully we'll be able to get you back on some of these at some point.
And I look forward to it. I mean, that's the truth is, if I thought that there was something that I did that wasn't appropriate, then you kind of expect that kind of retaliation. But for anybody that says, oh, it's because I've been outspoken about high-speed rail, I'm still on the transportation committee.
Exactly. Yeah.
And additionally, I'm not asking any questions that maybe I think are too out of line. No. Because ultimately my job is to represent the Central Valley and ask those questions.
100%.
And then I'm told as a new member to ask questions, to learn. So there's just this weird dynamic at play that I'm looking forward to getting more clarity, but I don't think that I think this was an effort to show strength amongst the Democratic caucus, and in turn it just showed our Republican caucus, that we're gaining strength and momentum.
Sure, absolutely.
And that there's weakness amongst them, that they have to come after a freshman Republican.
I completely agree, and I hate to, I got to point out the irony that, the party that claims that they are the party of democracy, right? And I'll put that in quotes or whatever, right. But, to strip members from committees, I mean, it's just not a good look, and I think it's certainly not democratic when you're taking the voices of people that represent 500,000 people in California away. Mm-hmm. It's just not. I don't think it's the right thing to do. So
I think it's disrespectful too. You know, James has been an excellent leader for our caucus, and he got to know each of us members in a way that I don't believe Speaker Rivas has. And so he knew what our skill set and backgrounds are to put us in those situations. And, now, like he's saying, I have some members with 8 committees and some members with 3. And so it's this thing that, yes, the Speaker has the power to do that, but is that really in the fairness category? That I know this word fairness just keeps coming up, that we saw this big shift in the last election, that I think people are tired of the partisan politics because there's so many crises and things going on that just need to be taken care of. And so when it becomes this very petty high school drama kind of game, people just get annoyed by it. And I just don't think this was the right move.
Totally. Well, thanks for, keep fighting for all the things you're fighting for on high-speed rail. I'm fully supportive of your bill and just would love to see, I don't want to get rid of the jobs, but we have so many other infrastructure priorities in our state, and better ways that we could be, expending those jobs, right? So and protecting farm jobs as well. 100%.
Because if we don't get water down in the valley, we're going to lose 4 of 5 every jobs. Remember
100%.
That, so.
100%. My last question for you before we move on to our stories of the week and talk through some of the stuff that's going on in Sacramento. This is more of a fun one. Do you have any hobbies? I had Jeff Gonzalez on recently, and he was like, what's a hobby?
Yeah.
That was his big take. And I'm like, that's fair. But do you have free time? And if you do, what do you like to do for fun?
So I kept my business intact even coming up here. So my hobby these days is working. But I do I love riding horses. I love spending time with my family. I love going to the lake. I love skiing and snowboarding, wakeboarding. Good. So I'm really hoping to learn a better work-life balance. But right now I'm wearing 3 hats and have technically 2 full-time jobs. Yeah. So God bless people like you that have kids. I have a dog, and he's a full-time job too.
Well, hey, dogs they take work too, and they need time with you too. And
I'm his emotional support human. So absolutely.
That actually is probably very true.
Yes, very much so.
That seems like actually the more common situation for people.
Yes.
No, I mean, that's great. And obviously being a first year legislator too, there's a lot more going on. I mean, I told a few people this, but the amount of meetings I had in January this year, starting my second term, was so many fewer than the amount that I had in my first year in January, right? Yes. I mean, it was just like, is this like, my wife was even like, is this like going to be forever? Like, I mean, just the pace, right? Like there's
insane, most days I don't have time to like go to the restroom. And then everybody kept threatening their freshman 15. I've actually lost weight, I think, because I just don't have time to eat.
Running around and like not eating.
Coffee's the major food group.
There you go. Oh, 100%. Yeah,
absolutely.
So, well, it's great having you here. Obviously always, I've been really enjoying getting to know everyone, and I think we have an awesome freshman class on both sides of the aisle, by the way. I've been able to meet with a bunch of my Democratic colleagues that are freshmen. I've been kind of doing one-on-ones and trying to invite them on the podcast. I've told them all they're welcome to come on anytime.
Okay, Gavin Newsom, watch out.
We'll get there. And, so doing that, we have had a couple Democrats on, but I would say it's definitely less common, but I always extend the invite. But it's just been great to get to know everybody. I think it's a good group of people.
The freshman Democrats, I've had a really great experience with, and a lot of them are just very open to conversations. And I mean, we always preface it of we're not going to agree on everything, but the fact that we're having conversations is huge, right?
That's what it's all about.
And a lot of them share common interests on a lot of those issues that I just talked about. A lot of people, that love agriculture and want to support agriculture or public safety stuff and cost of living. I mean, these are winnable issues that I think both sides of the aisle have really kind of tried to hone in on. Now it's up to us as legislators to pass meaningful legislation to address them and not get in each other's way. That's a very inefficient process, but we'll get through it.
Yeah, 100%. It's been good so far, and I'm looking forward to getting to know everybody even more over the next few months. We're going to be spending a lot of time together. So.
Yes.
So getting into our stories of the week, we usually run down a few of the big things that have been going on the last couple of weeks since our last episode. I've got quite a bit here to start on homelessness because there was actually it's a topic that I'm very passionate about. I was going to say,
you just take the reins on that one.
I'm very passionate about homelessness, but there's also just a lot that happened in the last couple of weeks on homelessness. First of all, Governor Newsom came out and launched his accountability portal. I don't know if you saw this.
Yes, I did.
And I went to it and I was like, and we'll put the link to it, in the show notes if anyone wants to check it out for themselves. But it's just very lacking, in my opinion, in data and in information. The only statistic that it has on behavioral health is number of people served, which honestly, number one, I mean, that's good to know, but it doesn't really tell you anything. It's like, okay, so you serve this many people. How many people got out of homelessness? How many people, got housing? How many people, fell out of the program? I mean, what does that even mean, right? And so I've been talking to a number of folks over the last couple of weeks about kind of where that website is lacking. And this is after he vetoed my bill to actually provide real accountability last year, which we got through every house of the legislature.
Oh, right? I know. I was a big fan of that as a candidate, by the way.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I will say one of the more frustrating things, maybe the most frustrating thing in my first term was you get something unanimously passed out of this legislature with bipartisan support, and then one guy says never mind. I mean that's rough.
Very rough. For sure. But to your point, I think it's actually so telling that this website of how little data they actually have with $24 billion, and then they want $6 billion more, which I actually am going to tell you, I know that homelessness is something that is very near and dear to your heart. It's something in the Central Valley we struggle with as well, by the way. But I use it as a comparison when people are upset that I'm asking for $1 billion for water infrastructure. Just $1 billion. And they're over here spending money that they have no data or science to prove that these programs are actually working, that I have no problem spending money on things that actually work. But when we're pulling $7 billion from our rainy day fund to have people tell the general public that our budget is roughly balanced, that we all know next year we're going to be in a terrible situation. And meanwhile, we keep throwing money at problems, but we're not seeing real results. How can we continue to do that when we're not doing so hot? I mean, if you look at us like a business, we're a failing business. When you sit at the dinner table, going through your expenses for the month, if you're $7 billion over your budget and you don't know how you're going to pay for it, and you're going to ask a friend to borrow $7 billion, that's not a good year. So it's terrifying for me, but to your point, let's get the data. Let's get to to the people. Yeah. That's what I always ask when I'm looking at programs. Okay, great. We want to spend this money on this. Who is it actually helping? And how can you assure me that for each dollar we spend, it's going to the person it's actually supposed to help? Not getting caught up in all of this bureaucracy that pennies on the dollar are actually being used for services to help people. That's my issue as a conservative, very fiscally conservative person. Yeah. And I think there's a big shift in California going on that people are asking those questions, because if the government can't handle their money and they're penny pinching to pay their bills, there's a big problem there.
Well, and I always like to say, like, if you are someone that likes tax increases, okay, I'm not one of those people.
I was going to say, okay.
But I know you're not one of those people. But if you, let's say you're a lawmaker or a policymaker that, supports certain tax increases where necessary, then you should be very supportive of wanting the money tracked.
Yes.
Because taxpayers will not support new tax increases. They will not, vote for your special, fee or whatever you're trying to get done if they don't think the money's going to be used on, the stated purpose or used wisely. And so I think that's where again, it's one of those issues like high-speed rail, the audit or whatever, the investigation. It's like, no, we should all want to know where this money is going, right? So let's talk about where the money's going. So I had fun I was on X a lot over the week.
I love it.
But the LAO, our nonpartisan legislative analyst office, put out a new study, a new report on one of the specific homelessness programs, the encampment resolution. I'm trying to remember the fund, I think. Mm-hmm. And it had a lot of data in it that was really helpful, but I just kind of summarized it in a single tweet. And they now are saying that if you count all of our housing and homelessness spending, we've hit $37 billion since 2019, taxpayer dollars on homelessness. Insane. So that's 6 years. In 2019, our homeless population in California was 151,000, and today it's 187,000. And that's just the 2024 numbers. So we don't even know what the 2025 numbers are yet. But wild. I mean, when you look at that, and that's all I said. I didn't even make commentary on it, because honestly,
you're just
to me,
facts.
That is all that needs to be said.
Right.
I mean, $37 billion, and what is that? Obviously I'm not a math major. 25,000 person increase in our homeless population. It's frustrating. And
when we look at that number, Josh, with the number of homeless people compared to the spending, I think we could build them all beachfront mansions. I mean, the Coastal Commission probably won't like it, but when you when you think about, you could build them a beautiful custom home for that. So what programs are we doing that? I understand it's more than just giving them housing. A lot of it, there's mental health components. I know that there's a big issue with drugs and things like that, but it's terrifying to me, because we're talking about the homeless population, but are we talking about our senior homeless population? They're very vulnerable. What about our veteran homeless population? Those are the things that I'm just so curious. I want to see those numbers, because we're seeing those programs for seniors and veterans and things like that be cut, and we're spending more money on homelessness. The same with, even the fires when we talk about that, or if we talk about in the Central Valley, cost of living, things like that. But it's just, we need to make the math come out to a reasonable number, and that has not happened.
Yeah, we had some people doing the math on X, like 200-something thousand per homeless person. If you break that number down, that 37 billion and the amount that we currently have. I mean, obviously, it's just, I think people are tired of not seeing results, right? And for so long, Governor Newsom and the legislature, and there have been some people on both sides of the aisle, by the way, in the legislature that have been kind of pounding the drum for more accountability. But we've measured success by how many dollars we're spending, as opposed to what that money is actually doing. Right. And I think in every community, people are seeing that the problem has not changed, and it's actually gotten worse.
It's getting worse.
Yeah. So on this same note, LA had an audit of its homelessness funding, and basically found pretty much everything we've already said. But a lot of what my audit, when we passed it a couple years ago, found at the state level, basically all this money is being spent and nobody's really tracking where it's going. And so I'm going to have some legislation on that later this year. The details will be out soon, but that's something we really have to get to work on. And to me, that's just a first step, because then you got to actually figure out how to solve the problem once you have the information, right? So, and then the last thing, I don't know if you saw this on homelessness specifically, but San Jose Mayor Matt Mahan, who I really respect, I think he's just been doing some really amazing things in San Jose, particularly on the problem of homelessness. And he got called out a lot of this, but they launched a new policy in San Jose called the Responsibility to Shelter policy. And it basically says, we will offer you services 3 times. And if you do not accept services on the 3rd time, there will be accountability. And you will be asked, basically, you cannot stay on the street. You have to take, and we'll let you keep your pets. We'll let you, we're not going to like separate you from your materials or your belongings or your things or your pets, but you do not have a right to sleep in the public spaces.
Right.
And he's getting a lot of blowback from the left, or I would say probably the more progressive left. And but he's taking action, and I think this is one of those policies where, and he's actually been defending it on X, which has been great. But just saying it's not compassionate to just let people live on the street and die on the street and overdose on the street. That's not compassion. For people that can't help themselves, we have to help get them into services or get them into treatment. And so I think this is a fantastic development for a major city to be making this sort of policy change. Obviously, it's going to be a pretty big experiment for a little while to see how it actually works. But I'm just really, tremendous respect for him taking action on this. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that idea or that concept.
No, I think it's something that is really important when we're talking about these things. There's no end line or finish line or metric. Yeah. And so I think things like this, that anybody that says, we don't want people dying on the streets. We don't want people cold and hungry. We have resources available to them. We can't force them to take these resources and use these resources. And so, but there are people that do need them.
Yeah.
But then at some point, the choice that has been made multiple times to not use these resources is becoming a hindrance on other people feeling happy, safe, and healthy in their communities. And I'm not saying we just throw them up and lock away the key, but we have to find ways to continue to have communities, and it's not just kind of free, whatever you want to do. Like there's the resources are here. We want to help you make the choice, and we will do whatever we can to help you, but we can't force you. But we have a community to think about and protect. It's balancing interests.
Yeah, and it's hard because I think one of the biggest challenges in solving homelessness is addressing the issue of what do you do when people say no to services, right? And that probably is kind of the biggest policy challenge with this whole thing. And so, very interested to see how this goes, and we'll continue to report back on that. Did you see the introduction of our colleague introduced AB 1333? You may have been hearing about it from some of your constituents. I know we've been getting a ton of calls on this bill, and so I wanted to bring it up. But essentially a bill that would fundamentally change, self-defense law in California by creating essentially a duty to retreat or flee as opposed to defending yourself in an instance where you're being attacked. Something that I think is a huge problem, but actually, I don't know if you've met Jeff Reisig. He's the Yolo County DA.
No, not yet.
But he put out something, and he's a DA, so he has a much better grasp on all these things. But I wanted to touch on his tweet where he talks about the bill. So he says one of the lawmakers that opposed Prop 36, by the way, I think that's a fun thing to point out. The Citizens Initiative to toughen penalties against repeat thieves and fentanyl dealers now proposes to expose innocent victims of crime who use deadly force against robbers, carjackers, etc., to homicide charges. So his proposal would reverse longstanding law and precedent in California, which holds that victims have no duty to retreat prior to using deadly force when being targeted and threatened by such violent criminals. The proposal would also essentially require victims to accurately guess the intentions of the criminals at the time of the attack before defending with deadly force. This is very dangerous. Violent crime has steadily increased in California over the last several years. Assaults in particular have increased dramatically. Disarming and disabling the innocent is not a rational solution. anyway, he says more, but I think that's a great, and we'll put that in the show notes too. But I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that bill when you saw it.
Oh boy.
Or if you just,
Well, I actually have an interesting story. So I was held up at gunpoint at a gas station. So for me,
wow,
very much big into being able to defend myself. And the thought that went through my head is I was not a concealed carry holder at the time.
Right.
I am now.
Yeah.
But at the time was when I turned away to jump over the center console of my truck to run away from the person that had a gun up to my head. I thought, well, if he's going to shoot me, I don't want to see it coming. And I know how horrible that feeling was, that I never want anybody to have to go through that feeling either. And so when this all came out, Mr. Zbur put a tweet out that he was never intended for people to not be able to defend their homes, because my head went to, what about that single mom with 2 kids? You're telling me that if she doesn't hear somebody break down her door, she has to run to her kids' bedrooms, grab her kids, and jump out the window. And if she doesn't do that and she fires back and kills somebody breaking into her home, she could be found criminally liable. That doesn't seem fair and right. So I actually met with Mr. Zbur, and I said, before I put any statement out on this, I just want to talk with you and find out what your true intent of this bill is. And we had a really great conversation that he really never intended for this to be about people defending their homes. He was actually a victim of a home invasion himself. So he understands it the same way that, I was held up at gunpoint, and you don't want people to feel that way.
Yeah, of course.
He says, we don't have any control over the legislative digest that goes out and things like that. So at the end of the day, we're going back to the bad guys need to be afraid that if they do bad things are going to happen. And that's just period, end of story. Same with Prop 36. We go back to accountability, measured consequences if you don't want to play by our rules. And this bill, I'm hoping, with the deadline approaching for the final language to be submitted, clarifies that further. We talked about things like imperfect self-defense and the Castle Doctrine and all of these things that, going through law school, I still have PTSD from having to memorize all of those definitions. But when you start messing with legal definitions, you open up ways for the bad guys to get away with what they did, or the wrong people to be in trouble. And so for that reason, I run through a legal analysis anytime we're changing statutes in our criminal code, and hopefully Mr. Zbur takes that into account before the final deadline for legislation.
No, I was glad to see him put that out, that he, is going to be changing this bill. I mean, obviously, to me, it's like, let's wait and see what it says, right? Because I did read the actual bill, and there's a lot in there that I just find very objectionable, but appreciate his commitment to amending it. I think devil's always in the details. So
absolutely,
we'll see what he comes back with. But it's always nice to see someone acknowledge, like, well, yeah, we this might have gone too far, or
And he said this is the first iteration of the bill. It's not final. So, like I said, I very much disagree with the bill as it stands, and will adequately oppose it if this becomes something we have to. But hopefully we can just maybe take this one out completely, or find the guts of it that's good.
I'm hoping this thing doesn't move at all, but
Same.
we'll see what happens with it. I mean, I think there are just a lot of forces in the Capitol that really defy common sense at every turn.
No kidding. As a new member, that was shocking.
Yeah, I know. So you see these first iterations of bills, and you're like, how do you even come up with that in the first place?
Yes.
But that is to me that's kind of one of these. But I'm excited to know that at least it's going to get amended.
Yes.
So last story of the week. Get your thoughts on this. There's a new study from the Assembly, actually, that basically just breaks down all of the ways that makes California more expensive to build. All the permitting. It was basically a report on this Select Committee on Permitting Reform, chaired by our colleague Assemblywoman Buffy Wicks, and basically just breaks down, all of the different ways, the red tape, the fees, the permits, the everything that makes it very slow and very cumbersome and very expensive to build in California. And I'm sure that you've noticed this in your own community, but hopefully we'll be able to do some work on that this year.
That's where I got my start. We would have these engineering projects, and by the time we started them and got through the permitting process, nobody wanted to be the lead agency, and then we had to do this environmental impact report, and it's just the cost of compliance in the state of California is out of control, and it's just not incentivizing people to grow or build here. And even then, it's hard to start projects that, could take 2+ years, because in 2 years, Lord knows how much your materials are going to cost or what your labor availability is. I mean, the issues go on and on. I applaud Assemblymember Wicks for her efforts on this. I hope that we can make it a very bipartisan thing. I know I have a bill that's a CEQA exemption for water infrastructure because we've spent millions of dollars, probably even billions of dollars, getting these water projects going. But then because of CEQA, they just get left in the dust and we leave them exactly where they're at. And then we don't pick up another shovel and we have nothing to show for it. So it's time to reinvent the wheel on this. I call CEQA the dinosaur that eats California because it's so outdated and it's killing us. So I'm excited. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Maybe if you just, in your water project, just include some sort of sports arena on the site, and you might get that CEQA exemption.
I'll work on that next time.
Maybe that's
I'll call
the key.
you Sacramento
that
Kings.
seems like what happens in the Capitol, though.
Yes, absolutely.
You get the exemption if if you're an NBA team, but that's okay.
No kidding.
But no, I agree. I think we have work to do there. I'm working with Assemblywoman Wicks on a couple things this year on permitting stuff. I have a bill as well on kind of the permitting issue. And so, this is something we have to figure out, and it has to be bipartisan.
Absolutely.
And so, I'm hopeful on that front. Okay, so are you moving to our next? We're going to get into the clips. I really want to talk about our clips of the week.
Oh, I do too. I'm excited.
About the new Newsom podcast. But some satirical relief here. Do you ever read the Babylon Bee? I don't know.
When it pops up on my X feed.
All right. So I haven't looked at Babylon Bee in a couple weeks probably, but I always just click into the link and see what the recent stories are, and we can react live. Oh man, is there anything good this week is the question. Meghan Markle announces new Netflix show that features her dealing with the negative fallout from her Netflix show.
Oh my gosh.
That's pretty good.
Yes. Have you seen it? It's so cringy.
I have not seen it. No,
oh my gosh. Riley Gaines is talking about how cringy the video that was going around of all of the Democrat legislators that were women on TikTok.
Okay,
She's like, isn't that the word we're using now? Cringe. Meghan Markle's Netflix show is cringe.
It's cringe.
So
okay.
It's cringe.
That's rough. All right. I have not watched it. I will say.
Do it if you want to feel uncomfortable and better about yourself.
Oh, this one I love because this is how my kids are going to feel. Man who thought he grew up poor suddenly realizes his dad was just a cheapskate. My kids are constantly just like I want to get this, and I'm like, no, we don't need that.
If you grew up in a Portuguese family, I think that's just the standard. So
right? Yeah, it's like, no, I'm cheap, and I admit it. Like that's actually a good thing.
It's good. It builds character.
Exactly. It was just really funny. So that one's good. And then let's see if we can find one more good one. Let's see. Oh, that one's rough. I'm not going to bring that one up. Some of these I'm like, I can't even read on the air.
Yeah, Josh, I'm trying to go a week without any chaos in my life. So let's not
I'm trying
feed
not to get you canceled or myself canceled, right?
Also, cancel culture is the worst. Can we cancel culture,
oh, please. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't see any more really good ones on here. There's a lot of Lord of the Rings ones. I'm
oh boy.
I don't know. Those are very specific.
I'm not a Lord of the Rings girl, so maybe
I read Greg Wallace. I read a Star Wars one last time, and
is Greg a Star Wars guy?
He's not. So
I was gonna say,
he was like, I don't even get that one. So
fun fact about Star Wars: somebody made a Star Wars poster on May 4th last year.
Okay.
And it was me and 2 other young Republican candidates, and they made Jim Patterson a character too. And the best
remember
part
that.
is
I
was Princess Leia, but somebody thought it was Shannon Grove. They're like, I get the other, but why is Shannon?
Yeah.
So anyways, love you, Shannon.
Hilarious.
Yes.
That's awesome. Yeah, so last one, disgruntled churchgoers hold up protest paddles like they did in the debate. That's pretty funny.
That is great.
I'm going to try
During
that with
the
my
sermon.
pastor. Yeah, just like heresy or, something fun like that.
In the Catholic Church not that long ago, they were telling us how they actually received direction to keep the homily shorter. So I'm going to laugh someday. There's going to be somebody holding up 1 minute, 5 minutes in the Catholic Church.
That's amazing.
Yes.
So, okay, let's get in our clips of the week. So I'll set the stage a little here. We got about 10 minutes, and Jesse's going to kill me because I got 3 clips, but I'm going to play them all at the same time. And shout out to Storyline Media Group who produces this podcast. But so our governor launched a new podcast, and I'm not criticizing launching a podcast. Obviously, we're sitting here talking right now.
Clearly.
But This is Gavin Newsom is his new podcast, and he kind of announced it with quite a bit of fanfare about a week ago, and then this week, I know you listened to it too, he launched the first episode, and he kind of had promoted it as, we're going to sit down with people we disagree with. That was like Newsom talking, right? Which I was like, honestly, I like that concept. I really like the concept of that. I like the idea of having these like ideologically diverse conversations. I think that's really good. But when he launched the announcement, I was like, we'll see, right? Like, we'll see what happens. First episode, he has Charlie Kirk on, and I was like, okay.
Swinging for the fences on day one. No practice swings, just straight for the fence.
Incredible. Like, honestly, I have to give the governor a little credit there, because I was like, I did not think he would do that.
Right.
I did not think he'd be willing to do that. I thought he would have some softball things.
You thought he'd invite Macedo. Yeah, absolutely.
Or Josh Hoover.
Or Josh Hoover, yeah.
Like, and just beat up on us a little bit. But no, he had, someone on that I would say has spent over a decade honing their positions and debate skills. And like, I was like, wow, that is not an easy first step. So I didn't know, let's just play the clips, and then I want to get your thoughts on the podcast as a whole. But there's so much in this.
Mean how I feel about it?
Yeah, like just kind of like moving.
Oh my gosh, his hand movements. Before you watch these clips, if you're not watching Gavin Newsom's hands, I challenge you to watch Gavin Newsom's hands, because that's all I can see.
It is true. It is true. I picked out 3 clips. They're not super long ones, but there's so much in this podcast.
Yes.
And there's honestly a lot that, I was like, man, that would be really good, but we just don't have time. So I'm going to play 3 that I pulled out. One of them was just from the gate, I thought was hilarious. He made obviously some big comments about, transgender men in women's sports. Mm-hmm. So that was what really got things riled up. And so we'll play that one, and then kind of ended on one about ideological diversity. But we'll play these and get your thoughts.
There's a lot to unpack there.
A lot to unpack there. I'm going to let you go first, because it's just too much for me right now.
Okay, so one of the clips you didn't play, which was probably my favorite part of it, is Charlie, Kirk, and I are the same age. And so he talked a lot about the youth vote. And for me, that is a big challenge that I have taken as the youngest female in the state legislature, to get out to young people and make sure that they are educated on what they're voting for, because we are the future. And all of the things that the generations came before us that made it a lot harder to get your start in life, it's our turn to turn it around and fix it. So I love what Charlie was talking about, and the shift that's happening right now of you're losing them because you're not talking about things that they're caring about. They're worried they can buy a house, they can afford to live, all of those things. They can have a good job. Newsom's son, first of all, iconic to be like, you closed down schools for 2 years. What's one more day?
I mean, that was such a brutal start to the whole thing. Like, I started listening to it, and immediately I was like, oh my gosh, he's going to get crushed. Yeah, like Newsom is just like in over his head.
But what's funny to me is on that podcast, he is showing us that he's making this giant play for the middle. Fantastic.
Correct.
We've been begging him for that now.
Right.
It's sad it's happening at the nth hour. But is that actually going to be reflected when he's looking at bills he's going to sign or things he's going to support? Because it's kind of like the Trump-proof California. He's Trump-proofing California, but then he's going to D.C. and begging Trump to come in and help.
It's been really fascinating. And I actually was talking to one of my Democratic colleagues recently about kind of how they're mad because he's backing off of Trump now. And I'm like, yeah, but isn't that good strategy when you need something from the federal government? Why antagonize an administration that maybe you disagree with on things, but why antagonize them? It just makes no sense. It's a bad strategy.
Terrible.
So yeah, I've been talking about this podcast all week to different people and getting people's reactions to it and thoughts. I do have to say, I mean, obviously, a lot of people are like, well, Newsom's just doing this to run for president, move to the middle. And it's like, fine. But, that's probably true. But at the end of the day, I always appreciate when someone moves more to, I would say a reasonable position or my side of the position. The left is obviously, I would say the progressive left, and, the LGBT caucus put out a big statement condemning his remarks on
they were furious.
on men and women's sports and agreeing with Charlie Kirk on, this topic. But the reality is that's an 80-20 issue. Mm-hmm. That is an 80-20 issue. What Newsom and Charlie said in that podcast is where the vast majority of Americans are. Right. And so this idea that like you can't be with 80% of Americans is insane. I mean, I actually thought that was not controversial at all. I get why the left thinks it was, but not, I mean, at the end of the day, it's an issue of fairness. So it'll be interesting. I was a big, I was on a school board during COVID, so I was fighting to get the schools back open and things like that. And so that first clip just, and I actually shared it with my 16-year-old son, because my kids lived through this, right? They were kind of a victim of the longest school closures in the country, by the way, which was California and Governor Newsom. And I will never forget it. I think people need to be reminded of it regularly, that actually happened. But while, by the way, his kids were going to private school, and so it's just maddening. But I shared that with my 16-year-old son, and he was just dying. He thought it was hilarious, and I think it really does underscore, just kind of where the young people are at. I mean, it's pretty. It's funny to know that his son's kind of a Charlie Kirk fan.
Well, the strategy behind Charlie Kirk and even what the Trump campaign did previously was they met them where they were at. And I loved the message that the Democrat National Party, I think in California as well, there's certain populations that they just assume they have their vote. The young people, Black voters, Hispanic and Latino voters, and we as Republicans, and that's why, I thought Jeff and Leticia did a really good job picking up their seats, because they went and met voters where they were. And they didn't take for granted just because, you're a Democrat, you're not going to vote for a Republican. They went and had conversations with them. The same way Charlie's going to college campuses, which I think is usually one of the most liberal breeding pools.
Disagree with me.
And said, debate me. And then he would put them in a corner that they couldn't, argue back. And it was incredible for me to watch. But that shift is happening. We as Republicans now have a duty to make sure that we don't let off the gas. We have to continue on that momentum, stay on message, and put our money where our mouth is. Let's do things that actually help these people that are helping us get elected. And to the ideological diversity clip that you played, that's our caucus, right, Josh? Like in caucus lunch, I always love, we have such
a lot of diversity. Diversity is our strength. And our challenge.
But the diversity is the challenge in that there's so many viewpoints, but usually if we all agree on something, that means that it's good for rural and urban, it's good for beaches and mountains and valley. And just, it's also interesting to me. I think we have a majority-minority caucus, I'm pretty sure.
I believe so. I believe that's correct.
Which is interesting. And I love that if you look at the Republican legislators, I don't know the Dem caucus as well, but I feel like it's really representative of the districts that we represent.
It is, for sure.
So that's powerful, right? That there's diverse backgrounds, but also diverse backgrounds that are the most qualified for the job.
100%. I will close on this note on the podcast, because I also didn't play this clip, but he kind of alluded to it in that final clip about ideological diversity. And I actually will just start that by saying, I do appreciate the governor doing this podcast, because that's what it is. It's getting people from different backgrounds, different opinions, and having the conversation. I think that's more of that should be happening, not less.
Yes.
But there was a later part of the podcast where, Charlie kind of challenged Newsom on why he didn't think Democrats can really survive or do well in the long-form podcasting space, because they don't have the intellectual muscle, or they haven't built, I should say, not that they don't have, they have not built the intellectual muscle over years and years of people disagreeing with them.
Right.
Because there's so many bubbles, right? When you grow up, I mean, you went to, I went to UCLA, most of what you're hearing is from kind of a left-leaning ideology or perspective.
Absolutely.
And if you are not with that perspective, you really learn how to stress test your positions. Even Newsom kind of used that term, we got to stress test our positions, right? That's what podcasting is all about. And so I thought that was an interesting kind of framing of it too. And they chatted about that a little bit. So
that's how we fight back, by the way. We as Republicans can't keep going into rooms that agree with us. I mean, I did that before I got into politics. And I'm actually impressed that Newsom is doing it, but a lot of his Democrat colleagues are not doing that. And when you I think that's a big reason why they're struggling with some of us asking questions, is they've existed in a sphere that it's because I said so. And we're saying that's not enough, and the voters are now saying that's not enough. They're wanting answers, they're wanting accountability. So challenge us, and we'll bring the facts to the table, and you better bring the same.
Totally. Well, let's wrap there. I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you so much, Allie, for coming on.
Thank you for having me
today. If you have ideas for future shows, you can email pointoforderpod@gmail.com. As always, listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Watch, subscribe, or follow on YouTube, X, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at Point of Order Pod. And follow Allie and I on X, myself at Joshua_Hoover. I believe yours is at Assemblywoman Macedo, Macedo.
Yes.
All right. So, but we'll make sure to put it in the notes too. So
awesome.
Thanks, Allie. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh. Look forward to serving with you.
See you later.